This is Gnosis of the Body, where we explore embodied wisdom in healing the mind-body split through personal stories, using Jungian depth psychology, mythology, and following collective trends, and following wisdom stories of the body. Welcome to Gnosis of the Body. This is Catherine, your host, and today I am with one of my favorite teachers, Laurent Rohr, a fellow Français comme moi, and also one of my teachers of the most powerful part of yoga training that I did, which is the breath. I, as you all know, was completely transformed by my training, and it was really, really the breath that did it. And after my training for years, I seriously wanted some more training. And it was not until I found Laurent's class in 2020 that I found what I was looking for. So Laurent has 35 years of practice as a yogi, 15 years of teaching. He now is more focused on Scaravelli methods, somatics, but he is classically trained in the Gita Nanda method, which is very, very breath focused. And what I loved most being his student was the slow approach versus the fast approach to breath work, and the gentle versus the aggressive. And because this is such a philosophy of both of ours, I just wondered if you'd start off saying something about that, Laurent.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you, Catherine, for inviting me. And by the way, I'm not considering you anymore as my student. You are a colleague because your expertise is obviously in your own world is as good as what we are now. I mean, I'm honored that you come into the trainings and all this, and it's always lovely to have you next to me. So you're supporting me as much as I'm supporting you. But to come back to your question about the approach of breath work, let's not forget that the origins of pranayama are not based into techniques which are forceful. They're based on techniques which are gentle, because at the end of the day, pranayama, it is a gateway towards the next stage of yoga, which is the meditation. However, saying that, 1,000 years ago, before we took very much pranayama as a gateway towards the next stage of our yoga practice, pranayama was actually a very forceful practice, and to the point where pranayama was a tester onto the ability of the practitioner or the at the time the yogi to, for example, hold his breath such a long time until maybe he's going to collapse. What kind of benefits, meditative benefits, spiritual benefits can you gain from a forceful retention of breath until you collapse and nearly die, really? So pranayama had different ways to show itself within yogic practice 1,000 years ago. But the most recent one for me has to be teaching people to find their natural breathing, to find the subtlety in a breathing. And this is super difficult because of the amount of external distractions and external attacks, which is stimulating our nervous system and our respiratory and our cardiovascular system to the point where subtlety in breathing doesn't exist anymore. So yes, breathwork and pranayama, for me, has to be taught in a gentle and more intuitive way so that we return to what I called the silence breath, the breath which is within us and we don't need to control, or the breath which needs to be more spontaneous.
Beautiful. And that is really connected to our neurology as well, and carving out new neural pathways, which comes with gradual, regular practice, as I recall.
No, totally. I mean, it's this the breathing process starts from an activation coming from the oldest part of our brain. So we speak about the brain from the beginning, even before you start thinking about, I'm breathing and I'm feeling it in my lungs or with my diaphragm. For the diaphragm to activate this beautiful action, it has to come from the brain. So the brain is, and the neural part of ourself is totally involved in a process of breathing. Of course, it has to be. But unfortunately, the reverse process can happen. If the breath is erratic, then the brain will be erratic as well. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm. So that brings me into one of the major points I wanted to ask you about. So as I've described many times before in previous episodes, I moved back into intense yoga practice from coming from a place of workaholism, burnout, working for notre cher gouvernement français. I was in lovely what we call in French a fonctionnaire, a government employee.
La bureaucratie.
C'était ma spécialité, quoi. So I had what I call desk body, and I had also had a severe shoulder injury. And what I did not know at the time was that it was a rotator cuff injury. And the way my body, because the body, when we injure ourselves, always tries to compensate beautifully. And unfortunately, my body was using the muscles along my back and my rib cage. For those in their anatomy, it was the latissimus dorsi that ended up getting so tightened and shortened that when an osteopath figured out what had been going on with me, it was jamming my diaphragm, constricting the diaphragm, dropping down, and jamming it up into my stomach. And that took a lot of osteopathic work, a lot of figuring out. I did not consider myself someone who had anxiety, but I was, in retrospect, functioning very anxiously. And I think that's important to say because a lot of people that are like, as I was, underbreathing and suffering from anxiety, whether it's one sets off the other, they're not aware of it. And I had gone to doctors for a strange problem of I kept throwing up. And when they did all these gastrointestinal tests on me and found no problem, they did what motivated me in many steps to call my thesis Hysterical Yogis, because when you know something's wrong with your body, but the doctor can't find it, hysteria is a lovely old word to basically explain how you get treated by doctors when they can't figure it out. And the gastroenterologist couldn't figure out why I was vomiting, and so he dismissed it and said, here, go to your therapist and get an anxiety medication. The osteopath, years later, figured out it was a mechanical muscle thing based on this shoulder injury. So my question for you really is, how often do you see, because I to this day don't know if it was I under breathing because I was physically restricted and then I had anxiety, or had I had anxiety and this was a concomitant issue? Because you see this so much.
Yeah. Okay. So let's speak a little bit about you as a human, or us as humans. There's patterns in the way we behave in our lives. There's things that we do with our body, which is copying the way we conduct our lives. And Thomas Hanna, which is a student of Moshe Feldenkrais, created a style of practice called somatic yoga. And it's based on the therapeutic approach, on how we refine balance and move away from habitual shapes of the body. Okay? And what's happening is, in the way he teaches this, is this three major ways that people restricting their body. The first one is called the green light reflex, which is when you, as Catherine, working for la bureaucratie française à Paris, we're certainly extremely always into your toes, rushing for deadline, rushing for creating events, doing all your planning for your trips and etc., etc., etc. It
Traveling on the
means,
airplane. I lived on Air France.
exactly. And so what you do is just imagine yourself just throwing your body forward constantly and sending your shoulders back, sending your arms back, and restricting the entirety of your back muscle. So this is number one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So it's like a slow accident, basically. It's like a slow, gradual car accident over time, working at a desk and doing that.
Yes, exactly. It's that constant, I'm throwing myself forward, I am rushing, I'm running, I'm never stopping. And what happens is that your back is reducing in space, your front body is hyperextended, and that provokes a state of sympathetic state, meaning it provokes a state where you are always on the go. And this, your body and your brain cannot sustain it at all. It can't. And if you have to rest, you have to stop and you have to relax to sort of move away from that constant doing action.
And I didn't, so I burned out, right?
Exactly. So what happened when you burned out? You've done, and you certainly experienced the opposite effect, which means you went into the startle reflex, the second reflex, or called also the red light reflex. That means you cover and protected the front of your body. You've done the opposite of the green light. You retract the front of the body. You started experiencing stress and anxiety, which is part of the burnout. And by doing so, you stopped the ability of your front muscle to works very well. So you restricted the muscle of your chest. So when you speak to me about your injuries or your rotator cuff, this is coming from certainly the green light reflex, but which didn't get better because of the issue with the red light reflex, where you were tightening yourself into a ball, literally. And by doing so, you are stopping the good functioning of your rib cage, the good functioning of your diaphragm. And when you start speaking to me about digestion issues, you also restricted your digestion to work very, very well. You possibly had, I'm not sure, you don't have to say that here, but sometimes women will tell me that they have issue with their periods, they have issue with their hips, they have the issue with their knees. Basically, you're restricting the good functioning of your body because you're responding to your work and your life. And by doing so, your body comes into a safe mode where you think it is safe mode, which is not really a safe mode. So what yoga and practice help us to do, or somatic work experts to do, or any kind of relaxation, is to return to this space of balance between those two reflexes. Now, there is another reflex called the trauma reflex, which is the restriction of the side of the body. This is the one that you experience when you receive a shock, or when you have carried your rucksack or your handbag always the same way for decades, or perhaps you have suddenly your scoliosis, etc., etc. So that's another story. So your story, Catherine, made me think that you experienced the two first reflex, the green one first, super busy. Your body sent the messages to your brain. You are not safe. So you retracted yourself, burnout, stress, anxiety, lack of breathing, no sleeping, certainly, and indigestion. So this is how it's such a simple way to base ourselves on. And if we understand this, then maybe we could start bringing techniques, practices, which helps us to return to the space in between those two reflexes. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. It does. Thank you. That was beautiful. And so, I think this brings us to our next point really beautifully, is that I was having a chat on one of my early yoga retreats with a fellow yogi, and just very, very enthusiastic. And she had said, I've done over 1,000 hours of pranayama. And she was pulled into it because she started to go to yoga and she just had what I now call tears in ears, where there was no real sadness, no, there was no conscious awareness. But at the end of the class, she was lying in Shavasana and just tears would come. And she said, I would have so many tears, they would be accumulating and running into my ears, and it would feel like I'm underwater, because I've gotten so much water in my ears, which I also love because that creates an embryonic state sound wise, which is a whole different
Yes,
conversation.
it
um,
is.
Water, underwater vibrations, hearing your breath from the inside. I can go on and on about that one. But she finally highlighted something for me that even though I'd been doing the yoga, I wasn't able to really verbalize, which was at the end of a yoga class where I've, moved my body through the fast part of vinyasa. I've slowed it down through the gradual grounding of inward poses, stretching. I've moved my back through some back bends, and now I'm coming to rest. So first of all, I don't know if you're willing to explain what's happened to the brain and the body through a course of classic course of that 90-minute vinyasa bell framework, and then what's happening when we land in Shavasana. And you have so much experience. I imagine you've got some stories to share on what you've seen there.
The reason why are we doing yoga? At the end of the day, this is the question. And depending on age, depending on environment and the teachers, of course, there's different reason. But the main reason why we're doing yoga is to return to ourselves. And it's to return to ourselves in different levels. We return to ourselves first in the physical level. And this is very important. And this is an important foundation for all yoga therapists. It's an important foundation. And we have to understand embodiment. It's the main foundation for all psychotherapists, counselors, people who deal with people with trauma and PTSD. Let's speak about that another time, maybe later or another time. But in general, if you ask the people, the student, why are you here? And most people say, well, this is a time I'm going to be moving. This is a time I'm going to be breathing. And this is a time I'm going to have a moment of rest. This is people who want to detach themselves from the world, which is super busy and super crazy at the moment. The classes are, you could see how the classes level change depending on the news, for example. And so people want an embodiment. The people want something which return to themselves. And this is super important to understand. So we're doing this practice. We're doing vinyasa, we're doing ashtanga, we're doing skaraveli, we're doing somatic, we're doing yin, we're doing mandala, whatever the practice it is. At the end of the day, they're all coming from one thing. And the main point is we need, and the yogis, the old traditional yogis, the sutras understood that by saying the first thing you need to do is to work with your body and say you need to, what they used to say, cleanse it, although I disagree with that word, but we need to prepare it. You need to be able to reach a place of happiness and a place of calm and peace. You need to prepare your body to feel less tense, less painful. Or if you are tense and in pain, you need to learn how to adapt yourself around this and deal and build resilience for perhaps some things that you can't get rid of, because this is a problem. People think yoga, it's a magic wand. We're going to do yoga, we do new breath work, and it's going to change everything. No, it's a way to connect with yourself on your true nature. What I am physical body. My body feels a little bit tense. My body, I have this old problem in my hip. So the practice of yoga is basically a way to return to the physical body that we might have lost because we are working too hard, or we are studying too hard, or we are stressed and anxious because somebody else, it's something in our family or in our work, is detaching ourselves to the body, or in the terms of a trauma, someone suffering from trauma or PTSD, being detached, dissociated from their body to think about what's been happening in the past, which is a terrible thing. So all these practices happens. Now, what happens is it's sometime when you fall into that body and you are not prepared for it, well, you meet stuff that you forgot exists. And it could be old injury, the old memories, the old suffering, the old traumas, the old habits and beliefs, which doesn't suit us in this moment in time. And this could create a reaction with the nervous system and deep inside of subconscious, which release this sudden moment of emotional release, how we call it. And they could show in all different ways. So your friend, your colleague cried, but this emotional release can also show with overexcitement. Sometimes you could see someone which is super excited at the end of a class. Sometimes there is anger. Sometimes there is laughters, very loud laughters. Sometimes there's a very deep silence. It's the complete opposite. Sometimes people go inwards and stay inwards. This is depending the character. So whatever you're doing in the yoga practice, and it's got to start from the body first to make that place, this perhaps possibility of emotional release. We need to make sure the body is in a good state to receive this. And the last thing we need to do is to trying to stop that to happen, you as a teacher, you as a facilitator. I'm going to give you an example. Last week, I was teaching around the diaphragm. And I had a young lady, and she was obviously an experienced yoga teacher or yoga student. And we done a work around the diaphragm as conditioning the diaphragm, meaning trying to give it a bit of work to do, a bit more elasticity, a little bit more strength as well, etc. There was a moment where we were using an exercise, she burst into tears. And I noticed that. I finished the class and I went to speak to her. And she was and this is great because she was willing speaking. And she explained she was left by her parents when she was a child, very young, at the age of 8 or 9 or something like this. And right after that, she started developing a disease based into the tissues around the lungs and around the diaphragm. It was like an infection. This was obviously, perhaps, I don't know, I didn't speak or dialogue with a psychotherapist or doctor, but from her, it means that right after the trauma of being left by her parents, she created a disease as the body reacted by creating that disease that she suffered for many years after that. And then she cured herself. And then suddenly, Laurent arrive and teach her to do this connection with the place, which was a very sensitive area, the diaphragm. And she burst into tears. And so my first reaction was, are you okay? How did you feel? And she actually found this emotional release coming from the diaphragmatic practice, something extremely soothing and relieving. And for me, it was like a big relief to my side because I was like, it's someone who understood her own body because she was a yoga student for many, many years. She was an Ashtangi and Jivamukti practitioner. So, we could have a conversation, and this taught me so much about the power of doing yoga and the power of doing breathing. But you as a teacher and a facilitator, you need to keep your eyes on the people, and you need to create that safe space where people could do those emotional release. And Shavasana is another place where you are deep diving within yourself, especially when you're doing Yoga Nidra. In the stages of Yoga Nidra, you are teaching people to deep dive deeply without the body in view into the deep depth of their own subconscious, where all these perhaps emotional feelings, beliefs, habits are resurfacing, going up to the surface again. And this is when the emotional release, and I had many emotional release in my classes during Yoga Nidra. So it does happen. But this is a kind of thing, for me, the most important is to speak to the person after. Sometimes the person wants to speak, sometimes the person doesn't want to speak. But it's important to understand that in terms of practitioner, teacher, facilitator, because what I see for my trainees is that they are scared of it. So I want to say to them, this is part of the practice. This is part of what we are perhaps experiencing in times. So there you go.
This is such a beautiful illustration of the other aspect of Gnosis of the Body, where we're exploring the psychological aspects. Because I found the training very therapeutic, is that the subconscious for me really comes out through my reconnection to the body. And that I think this is what can be missing very much in the therapeutic talking space, is the body. And that you've just perfectly described the holding container that is similar to a therapeutic room, but you and I are always very clear that we are not therapists, but I think it is an excellent complementary practice to do yoga or other body work, to work with the mind and the speaking with a therapist, because there is a connection to the subconscious that occurs through body work that it needs to be integrated with therapeutic work. And I don't think one or the other can stand entirely on its own, which is a controversial thing, because many yoga teachers want to heal everything and be the therapist, and many therapists, think that it is the only method, where it is, I truly believe now, the two must go hand in hand. So you describe how you are able, with your experience and wisdom, to hold the space, a therapeutic space, but you are not a therapist, of presence for the subconscious awakening, presence for the story of the person that is connected and is playing out through the reawakening of the body in that moment. This client you shared the story of is perfectly illustrating how subconscious memories of ages where we're extremely young, and we, depending on your training, you consider that we have no memory of those times. But when we have, quote, no conscious memory, that is exactly when the events of that time of our life become embodied, and they reside in our body, in our, quote, subconscious, but it is very much present in a felt way. And not that you and I are medical professionals, but from the yogic perspective, we understand that the lungs are connected to the heart chakra, and frequently illnesses of the lungs are connected to mourning. And my grandparents were a psychiatrist and a psychiatric nurse, and from his medical training, my grandfather was always very clear with my aunt, who suffers from asthma, that this was a psychosomatic reaction. She did have actual asthma. She did have, and still does, very severe asthma. But both of them were very clear that the onset of it as their child was from a psycho-emotional perspective. And I love this because I'm also in a training right now with the SAP, which is one of the Jungian training centers here, with Dr. Yoram Inspector, who is a psychiatrist, but he's specializing in psychosomatic disorders of the body and the connection to the subconscious and the emergence of the subconscious through illnesses in the body. So these are always really important things to keep in mind as yoga teachers and breathwork teachers. And briefly, I want to bring in something that is a personal bête noire of mine, something that drives me nuts, which is colleagues in breathwork who I call the violent healers. And what that is for me is they might not have the psychology training I do, and they might not have the experience to hold space, but they have great enthusiasm. And what I will give the stereotypical vision of this is the person that is doing a certain type of breath work, which is very popular and very fast and will remain unnamed. And they're like, we're going to do a trauma release today. Everyone's going to do a trauma release. And they're going for a trauma release, which is a space that needs to be held with great tenderness in a very, what I'll call ego achievement kind of dynamic. And I have real issue with that. And I have been present at many events where they're like, okay, all right, everyone, we're going for the trauma release. Yeah. And to me, that is trying to integrate the ego into actioning something to emerge from the subconscious that needs to come out at its own pace in the safely held spaces you described creating in trainings with patience and awareness that what is going to come or what is not going to come is not within human control. It is coming from the choice of the individual's subconscious.
It is. I mean, to add to this, it made sense for me in my breathwork and training to put more physical practice to start with, so that the person we come to learn how to prepare the person to breathe, basically. And even if it's a psychotherapist who comes to me and learn, they need to learn how I'm going to prepare the person, how I'm going to keep them within the body in case something like the emotional release might happen. And you're right, we're not, and you know that I'm not saying we are not doctors, we are not healers, but we're still very much in tune with people's health and well-being. So we have to learn the foundation of all that. And we have to understand body first before breath. Prepare, condition. Because if someone are having difficulty with the breathing, they could always come back to the body. This is the thing. This is the basis of working with mental health and any other condition. Okay, I think we take the breath too much nowadays as breath work in general as the magic powder, the thing, your magic pill. You take it and it's going to solve all the problem. It's not solving all the problem.
Yeah, we want the fast solution, don't we? Everyone wants the fast
absolutely.
fix.
Breath work is part of a bag of tools. And of course, the person who's want to sell well their training, they're going to want to start mentioning the big results at the end of it, which is not going to be the big result. And honestly, I spoke a lot of people experiencing what you experience, and they didn't have a very good, some have some fantastic experience. Some people have bad experience. I think we need to learn how to take our students as individuals, not generic breathing practices, which is going to do the same to everyone. So this is an important thing. Safety, it's super important with everything. From the beginning, from the moment you start preparing the person, from the moment you welcome the person in your class, and then you create this bubble where you're going to hold the space for them.
The container, and then the therapeutic container.
Literally. That's it. And also the possibility to be autonomous, meaning they do whatever they want. And they also a link to you so that they converse and have a discussion with you. So in case something happens. So obviously to be able to create a conversation with your student, you have to understand what you are teaching. And to understand what you are teaching, you need to practice it. You need to speak. You need to speak to colleagues, etc., etc., etc. So this is very, very, very important. Emotional release is such when it happens in front of you, the first time, it's like, what's happening? I mean, I remember the first time it happened to me, I had a cold sweat. I didn't know what to do. And this is really pushing me to learn more in time and to understand, okay, what do I do if someone in front of me is having a reaction to, it could be somatic physical practice, not just breath work. It could be yoga nidra. It could be a meditation. I've seen this many times. Of course, breath work is a very powerful, quick way to perhaps release their emotions, but it's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to create, um, to help people to create their own nice way to live, to feel happy with themselves, to feel happy with their body, so that they feel happy with the others as well. This is the most important thing.
Yeah. And I think it's also important for us to mention, we're speaking of the subconscious of the student coming to us, creating the space. But as teachers, our development is also to remain conscious and aware of where our motivation is coming from. And as you beautifully described, you welcomed that challenge of an emotional release happening with great humility and wisdom. Because I think if you're driving at a result of like, I want this person to release, which I see a lot in the spiritual community, that's an ego-led, goal-oriented thing, and you can't have that because that is an impatient perspective, and then the person is coming from a place of power motivation, and I can affect this great thing and we can do this. And in point of fact, they cannot hold the space. Whereas when you come from the perspective you're describing, your reaction was one of wisdom and humility and being prepared to reach this new challenge in your stage as a teacher. And that's true wisdom to me.
Thank you. Yes, it is. I mean, this is the encouraging facilitators to not learn from me. I'm just the beginning, but experience. And this is a word I use a lot now with my mentees or trainees, communication. And personally, myself, I'm always there to communicate with them as well, not their student, but with them, so that I'm encouraging them to do research, to question themselves, to question me, because I'm questioned sometimes. I've got a young trainee in Tel Aviv, which is yesterday sent me an email, a WhatsApp, and he said to me, my dad's friends got us a cancer which is place itself around the tissue of the lungs. I forgot the name of the disease. Actually, it's one of those Greek names, and we had a conversation. Yuri and I had a conversation, and I learned from Yuri as much. And I said to him, "Why don't you work with a man?" And he said to me, "Oh, and I never thought that I could do that." I said, "This is where you done the training. You didn't do the training just to teach a class. You done the training to help someone, to support someone. So why don't you go to the man, have a communication with him, see if he's willing working with you. But am I going to help him with his lung?" I said, "No, you're not going to help him with his lung. You're going to help him with your nervous system, so that his nervous system is in the right place to start the healing process, for this body to start the healing process, to fight the symptoms of the treatment for cancer, which is going to be atrocious, which is going to be horrible." So communication and learning from each other is super important, because trainings are one thing. They are the starting point, the platform for you to learn more with people's as a one-to-one, as a human experience. People who are learning training after training after training after training, they are not processing, and they are not learning from the result of the training. They just think that because they're adding another training on top is going to, and they're stuck in the academic wheel, and they're not experiencing their learning into the human experience.
Yeah. So knowledge, true knowing, is really acquired through the experience and the presence with the person, which is,
oh, so much.
Yeah, it's like that is the gnosis of the body. The wisdom doesn't come out of the book. It comes out of two beings sitting in front of each other, witnessing presence and sensation in their bodies, their reactions to each other. That is the basis of countertransference in the therapeutic space, in the psychoanalytical framework. And I just also want to touch on something that you mentioned there in doing breath work for someone who is suffering from a major illness. And in that case, it was an illness in the lungs, but also that when we are not doctors, we are not therapists, but when we are present with someone suffering through a major physical illness, the work of doing yoga or breath work is we're holding space for the interior of the body and
Exactly.
witnessing consciousness interiorly, on top of all the things that they might be doing, chemotherapy, surgeries, and that power of bringing wordless awareness and presence into the interior of an ill body can bring so much energetic healing to places that are unseen, subconscious, and need to rise up into our consciousness through felt direct experience in order to be held and healed.
Yes. I mean, the healing words very, very much scare me because it's a huge responsibility to put on your shoulders. Sometimes it's, you want to put this word to sell something and you can't do that. You have to be humble about it and say, the only thing at my level, the only thing I can do, because I don't have medicine studies behind me, but I have experience with yoga therapy and other things. It's to create, again, we're coming back to the safe place where people can just rest and can just let the body doing what it needs to do. There's a very good reason why we purposely put people into coma in hospital. We're not killing anyone when we're putting people in the coma. We're putting the people into a coma to be able for the body to recognize the place of rest. And then from that, the brain is doing and the body is doing what it needs to do to repair itself. Okay, so it's the same thing here. We don't give this practice which is going to change and heal the person on the spot. We are not putting people in coma either.
No.
But what we are doing is we are regulating ourselves in a way so that we are the autonomic nervous system. It's based itself onto the parasympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system, the place where the natural, the primal part of our nervous system, where we are only able to heal. We're only able to heal in that when we are in that state. We cannot heal into a state of sympathetic. The sympathetic is useful sometimes to keep the heart, to keep the blood around the body, but a parasympathetic, our nervous system and the brain have to recognize that the body is in that state so that we're able to heal. And that's what we do with the breathing. This is what we do with the pranayama. This is what we do with the physical practice. This is what we do with the shavasana. This is what we do with yoga nidra. This is do with the meditation and the mindfulness, with eating well, with nutrition, with acupuncture. We are trying to join these areas part of ourselves, which is the only way we could heal. And this is very important things to understand. And we cannot take one of those tools as the main tool.
No, absolutely
we have
not.
to,
No, it's not the one tool. And you went back into your word there. I'll point that out. You went back into the word heal. You're like, I'm scared of the word healer. And then you circled back to the word heal. And my entire point of this is that if we're like this example you had of this gentleman who was about to begin cancer treatment, if you're going into all the medical treatments, you can be very, very activated and very, very anxious and in your head. And that why
Exactly.
this is a supporting work is to bring in that subconscious embodied wisdom that comes up when we calm the nervous system, when we turn inwards, because there is a wisdom that needs to support the medical treatment that comes from within the body, that comes from the subconscious, that is only contacted through an embodied practice. As you said, it could be your acupuncture, it could be your diet, it could be your breath work, it could be all of these things together. But I think the point is that it's so important to support medical stuff with embodied practices because
Absolutely.
it will boost it, but it is not the only cure. No.
You know, the Asian medicine understood this. They speaking to Chinese acupuncturists, they're really strong about the fact that as much that they will love treating and healing someone with acupuncture standing alone, they're very, very also encouraging for you to go to see your GP. And this is amazing. And I think this is a great balance. And this is when you offer the opportunity to your students to say, okay, I'm here to help you when you go your asthma, but it doesn't mean that you have to stop taking your inhalers.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's important all that.
Yeah. And it can be, as we discussed earlier, a breathing illness can be connected to an emotional trauma, a sadness, a loss, a grieving in the lungs. We can augment the healing greatly with like a heart chakra work and a breath work and a diaphragmatic practice. But as you said, you're still going to need your inhaler. And I think it's very, very important in both the medical science oriented population and the very spiritual oriented population to see that they're not exclusionary and they do need to function together, and they can function together because there's a lot of swings in the collective, I think, now to favor one or the other. And we love to say something is bad and something is good, whereas it is much more holistic in the Eastern view, as you point out. And so I want to just go back to actually something we touched on a while ago, which is the difference of environment for practice. Because as we talk about anxiety, being busy, living in the city, you're doing every single week tons of studio and online practices for breath work, for stress, for anxiety with your students here all over London. But you're also doing retreats. And retreat is a very specific place where we're hermetically held. In the Jungian archetypal view, we have left the mundane. We have gone into sacred space. We're out of the world. And when we're back in the world, we're the hero. We're out there fighting the battles and everything. But when the hero retreats from the world, he goes on a psychedelic journey. He goes off on a shamanistic journey. He discovers something and gets a boon. So for me, the retreat is the space where deeper things can come through that don't happen in that hero striving battle. He's gone off, he's having his vision. But then we come back into that space and we have to take that boon that we've perhaps gained on retreat and try to use it daily. So how do you teach this? How do you see this come up in your students? What's the difference in city practice versus retreat practice and learning?
Oh, I think the issue we have nowadays in the studios is that the classes get smaller and smaller. I remember when I first practicing, I used to have my class was 2.5 hours. That was in early 90s. And this now, 2.5 hours is considered as a workshop.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I notice is that I've been creating workshops. I've been creating long days, full days workshops or retreats, I call them. And in studios, people want their workshops to be smaller and smaller. So again, when we are going to a studio, it's something which is part of your daily life. So you're going to put, like you're going to have you're going to go to the hairdresser or you're going to have your pedicure. I think sometime in most people going to a yoga studio has an element of, I'm going to do that. I'm going to have a quick shot of yoga, practice breathing, and I'm going to feel great after. What you as a teacher needs to do is to create an environment which is not stuck just to one session at a time. And what I try to do my best is to have as many long-term themes as possible so that a person could come back the week after and continue the process that they started the week before. This is the important thing in London. But obviously, in the meantime, between week 1 and week 2, you have been stressed 3 or 4 times. You have been working really hard. You have been looking after someone. You have been doing something which perhaps diminished a little bit your good work from the week before. So, you know, it's a different approach. The retreat itself is, again, I treat it a little bit like if I was putting all those different days from week to week into 1 week, basically. So if I was doing 6-day programs in yoga studio, 1 week there, 1 week, and I'm following the same theme, then maybe this entire theme in 6 weeks in yoga studio in London, I'll do it into 1 week. So the experience in a retreat is more potent. It's more experimental. You're creating again some spaces where people could reflect on what they're experiencing during the day. My day retreat are intense. I teach 2.5 hours in the morning and nearly 2 hours in the evening. This is a 4.5 hours yoga in one day. Plus, sometimes I do an evening thing. So, what you as a facilitator have to do is to make sure that the retreater arrive in the retreat with an intention to dive into an experience of a 6 or 7 day, something that in a yoga studio they can't do. They can't do this at all. Only if you encourage them to follow coming back the week after, coming back the week after, coming back the week after, and then they really see the string between each classes. In a retreat, you create a block of experiences. The way I work is, obviously, we have to start from day 1, day 2, day 3, day 5, right? And there is a thread here as well. And by the end of the retreat, the person has experienced something quite transformational, with all kinds of different tools, and hopefully leave the place. This is the point of a retreat. Leave the place slightly changed and slightly different to the day they arrive into the retreat. Can we do the same thing in London? Yes, but you need a certain commitment. You need to dive yourself. And something we forget also is that if you could, is to do your self-practice in between. So you continue the benefits of what you learn in the class in London, you continue through the week, and then you come to the next class and the next class, etc., etc. So I think the retreat, it's a more experimental, a more transformational experience that it is in a class. And the class in London is perhaps a quick fix in a sense.
Yeah, that's interesting because it makes me think of the issue of responsibility for transformation and how it's wonderful that we have a culture that's getting much more spiritual, and that things like going to yoga and going on a retreat, whether it's a yoga retreat or another kind of retreat, is becoming so ubiquitous. And I think archetypal symbolism is moving out of just the academic circles for Jungian depth psychologists and students of depth psychology like myself, and it's moving into the consciousness where everyone wants to go on the journey to have the transformational journey. Whether they're going on a retreat for yoga or to do psychedelics down in South America or something like that, but that you bring up self-practice at home as the part of this. And I think that is so essential to seeking any kind of transformation and going away on retreat, is that you have to have a space present in yourself before you go away where you are sitting with yourself alone, doing your breath work, doing your meditation, doing your yoga asana, whichever your path is, doing your journaling before a psychedelic retreat, so that you have that space with yourself and with your self-knowing, so that there is a part of you that's ready when you go away in community, in sacred space, away from the world, to open up to a higher level.
Yeah. And to deal with life in general. I mean, this is a thing. Retreat is like think about a yoga nidra. What do we do in yoga nidra? We're planting a seed, an intention. And I think the retreat is a metaphor of Yoga Nidra in a way. If you arrive in a retreat, you're planting a seed in your life and you say, okay, wow, I'm experiencing something which I really should be experiencing all the time. Can I repeat this in my daily life? Can I feel the same way in my daily life that I was feeling on the retreat? This is the thing. It's a reminder. It's a reminder. Say, oh, wait, okay, this is my true nature. This is what I'm supposed to be like, to be happy. This is what you should be experiencing on a retreat. There's a bit of entertainment, of course, but the issue with the retreat nowadays is that people think about the entertainment first, and they stop thinking about the real purpose of what retreat is supposed to be. Retreat is not always pleasant. Sometimes in the middle of the week, you're going to have all those emotional release that we've been speaking about at the start of this podcast. The emotional release, this is a sign that people are going through something and transform during that retreat. Can we do this in London in a studio? It's very difficult.
Yeah. And that's again the slow way is the fast way, to quote one of my teachers, Joanna Miller. The slow way is the fast way. And we don't always like that as a busy culture that might be aware of healing, but doesn't really want to take the time, or doesn't have the time, or don't think they have the time to heal. And this really brings me on to another one of the topics I wanted to draw you out on, which is, I've been pretty open on this podcast about, I had a trauma from an abusive relationship in my younger years. The main trauma was mostly a psychological one, through being very badly gaslit and put into a state of psychological submission. But there was a physical aspect as well. And I had when I went to my yoga teacher training, many years of therapy for this. But I had what has become known to happen in yoga, a somatic traumatic release I was on the mat. It was a body scan at the end of a yoga class, and it was a very slow body scan, and it was it was a very intense nature. And I was very lucky that my training teacher, Esther Eckhart, who also was a trained psychotherapist, she warned us beforehand that this could happen. And of course, the psychology student in me is like, was suggestion placed there, and then permission was given, and is that why this happened to me? But I had a verbal reaction, and I cried and I shook. But what is very interesting to me is I connected through my body back to the part of the body that this person had been touching. It was my upper arm. They had twisted my arm behind my back. And I started to cry and mourn, something I had not been able to do in the speaking space of psychotherapy. And I said the question that I would say to them, which was, why? Why are you doing this to me? Which comes from a place of such fragility that in the psychotherapy practice room with my therapist, I could connect to my anger at this person. But it was only through the soft space of dropping into the body, on retreat, in a room full of women, in a safe space, which my teacher, where I could allow the tender grief to come through and say, why? It's still something that fascinates me, obviously, to this day, because I wrote a thesis about it and I'm still talking about it. And this is very much the ability of body work to contact the subconscious in a therapeutic way that is just still so powerful to me today, which is why I think
it is. I mean, you use the word somatic. Somatic is obviously at the moment a very used word in all different ways. The word soma means it's a particle of the body. A lot of people say soma is body. Yes, of course it is body, but it is a particle, very minuscule part of your inner cell. And this is directly connected to any other cells, and cells going to the brain, cells going to your nervous system, going to your functions. As soon as we start working with the somatic idea and moving and doing that tiny little movement, the brain is extremely intelligent and it's very safeguarding. he wants to safeguard you, and sometimes he doesn't realize he doesn't. It means that the brain sometimes is going to say, ooh, this part of the body is not very well. Let's shut it off. Or perhaps let's show to that part of the body that is not very well. So in that case, we make it worse. So the somatic work tend to repattern a little bit the wiring between your brain and that part of the body. And sometimes this is a tough things to meet. Okay. And this is why the somatic work in general has to be done in extremely slowly, because you are totally autonomous and in control of how you're going to want to respond to it. There's a lot of people who stop themselves to do the movement because they're scared to receive the result of the movement. So it's quite obvious on the mat. You're looking at people moving differently. And this could result to this sudden, you, Catherine, had a vocal experience. And, this is, I spoke about those different ways people respond to this, is laughter, crying, excitement, very loud, all that kind of thing, or going inward even more. But somatic work really touched this it's learning your brain that, I need to meet that part of the body again. And I want to learn why that part of the body is been such a long time shut off. And that could create some difficulty, challenges at the beginning. It's very, very difficult. So the facilitator needs to be here to support this and to encourage the person to do whatever they want, and at the right time to choose their time to decide to let it go, basically. And you said it yourself, you were in a retreat in the middle of ladies, of women, and you felt very safe, and you completely released those emotions. So again, coming back to the conversation before, the retreat is one of those environments where you possibly could do that if the retreat is organized correctly, basically.
And something else you had touched on earlier was the trauma side of the body. And this was all occurring down the right side of my body. The shoulder injury from the abuse was affecting the diaphragm, descending and restricting its movement on the right hand side. And it was just, it was a body scan onto the right arm that brought this out. So that's something that you see quite a lot, the trauma side of the body you described.
Yeah, the trauma reflex. Yes, absolutely. This contraction sideways that sometimes appear because physical trauma or mental, emotional trauma as well.
It was both.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was both.
Yeah.
It was
in some cases.
Yeah. So there was for me this real holding along that whole right side of the body, which is then, it becomes, which was it with the breath? Was the trauma, there was a mechanical physical injury, but was the trauma also just holding things together? The body was very, very guarded. So then it's interesting that the breath was not present. So, I mean, how do you see those things? Very much the holding, the awareness of trauma. And it's really more how the breath brings in a new level of awareness to a dissociated part of the body, isn't it?
Well, the brain knows, it sees and it feels, it's just being conscious of it. That's the only thing. If we're hiding trauma in the body, we have it. It's just a matter of doing the practices which is going to release them if we are, again, in that place where we are feeling supported and we're feeling safe. I'm not too keen to over extrapolate on the idea of trauma in the body, because this, again, is going to be different from one person to the other. And, the trauma in the body, again, can be experienced in all kind of different ways. It could be a pain, it could be emotional, it could be anger, it could be lack of breathing, it could be all kind of sorts. And one thing common is that we are into the sympathetic mode, in the freezing mode, which is obviously the particularity of experiencing trauma. So when we teach, we have to consider that in the group we might have several different students with different ways to experience. And then we have some people who just doesn't have any. So I've got a feeling sometimes trauma it's over put on a pedestal. I mean, what we need to learn is we need to learn as teachers to be aware of what we are saying and doing, and like the consent of being touched, the consent of being talked about, the consent of all these kind of things. So it's trauma. It's a large subject, and it becomes much more clearer and much more present in the teacher training. And I think it's a great idea, but we have to be very, very careful to don't always put it onto a pedestal, because there's so many other things we need to deal with before we actually deal with the trauma side as well.
Absolutely. That's definitely part of what I was trying to describe with the violent healers that we try. They want to very much go for the trauma, whereas it's a much more gentle thing for that to come into awareness. And really, you mentioned it there, what was going on in my body is that I was holding a state of freeze. And I think it was the habitual breathing deeper, breathing into my body, moving on the breath as we do in yoga, that slowly changed the neural pathways of holding in a freeze state, of under breathing in a freeze state. And I think that's something that is so prevalent in our society today, the under breath, the under breathing. And I wonder if you just say something about the consequences of under breathing and being under oxygenated, because when I got into yoga away from my workaholism and my burnout, I got rid of a lot of brain fog. I wasn't breathing sitting there hunched over my computer at my desk or hunched over my phone and typing. And that affected a lot of my mind. So I wonder if you'd say something about the prevalence in our very busy culture, go culture, of being under oxygenated and under breathing.
There's two issues with breathing. There's you're hyperventilating or you're hypoventilating. So the hyperventilation, it's more the person which is going to be super busy, because the person needs to be into the go state, and obviously the body needs more oxygen and demand more oxygen. Hyperventilation it's not having enough oxygen, and this is perhaps just coming from a dysfunction of one of the respiratory structures. It could come from obesity as well. It could come from a COPD disease. It could come from all the kind of different things. So again, here we cannot treat breathwork separately from everything else. We need to see the overall image of how the person is eating, living, sleeping, moving, and that will affect your breathing, because your breathing will adapt around what it needs to do. If the body needs more oxygen because you're super busy, because you run around, you're stressed, you're anxious, stress and anxiety demand a lot of oxygen, you're going to hyperventilate yourself. It's the hyperventilation. But if you depressed, or if you are more into this state of the physical body is not moving, less oxygen is also, it could be something which happens, but it's not as, most of the time I see more demand for the oxygen. And this is something that we call the shallow breathing. The shallow breathing, meaning breathing in the upper chest, it's a rapid breath which is using the upper region of your lungs to grab more oxygen much quicker, so that your body could absorb it much quicker. And this is dangerous.
Exactly. And that's what I was doing all the time. I realized, sitting at my desk, taking phone calls, dealing with the stress of a busy PR job, I was all in my small upper chest breathing.
It's like pumping a airbed. You need to do it fast to get the air into the airbed. It's the same for your body. Your body needs to be in high alert and sympathetic all the time. So you need more oxygen to create this. Your heart is going to need the whole process of hyperventilation comes from the need of breathing really fast and very quick. and with a big volume as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and coming from, the psychological studies I've done on trauma, that's really very much where what has happened in your past then becomes a posture in your body because of the nervous state. So we'll just take the one of freeze. And then you are also in hypervigilance.
Yes, exactly.
And what I found ironic when I looked through how this orients a person outwardly towards the world and function is this made me a really great workaholic and employee because I could react with great alertness to each demand. A journalist on deadline would be like, oh, we need to mobilize immediately, and this is the most important thing ever. So I was a very, very intense worker, and I had this reputation amongst my French colleagues as someone who could really get things done. I remember one of my French colleagues
You had a fuel.
Exactly. She was saying like, I don't want this other employee on this trip. I want you. She's like, because you know how to manage the people, you know how to move them forward on the agenda, you know how to get things done. And while that might have been great in the work world, it was coming from this place of hypervigilance, not breathing a lot. And man, was I exhausted all the time because I couldn't even take a full breath. I didn't.
I see that.
Yeah, and you could hear it even there in my voice. I got breathy, and I got in my upper voice, and I moved quicker in my breath there because just even the memory of how I would speak and breathe and gasp really quickly is, it. And we're surrounded by people like this every single day in our modern world. Yeah, it's so ubiquitous. I just want to kidnap the whole world and take them on retreat. All right. Well, thank you so much, Laurent, for coming.
No, it was very interesting to speak with you today and to express a little bit the simplicity of the work we're offering, but also the simplicity in terms it has to be simple, but also how difficult it is for us to sort of navigate from one person to another. But this is very exciting. It's very interesting to do. This is why I'm loving my job, really.
Yeah. And for me, I use it in this new somatic training that I've done where I'm literally just sitting with a person and we're just dropping into the body, and it's a mirroring practice for somatic work. And all I'm doing is like, what are you feeling? What are you feeling? What are you feeling? And so the breath work that you taught me is an absolute crucial support to that therapeutic work. So thank you so much for your work and all of your teaching.
Thank you so much.
Also, the last thing that I forgot to mention is that Laurent is not only a fellow breathwork teacher, but he is a fellow podcaster. And so you can pick this podcast up as well on the Penny Drops, as well as Gnosis of the Body. So thank you again for coming today on Gnosis of the Body, Laurent.
Thank you so much.
Namaste. Bye.